This is the Unregistered podcast, and I'm Thaddeus Russell. This is a show about ideas, people, and behaviors that are considered inappropriate, out of bounds, or beyond the pale. The things you're not supposed to talk about if you're a school teacher, a college professor, a businessman, a politician, a parent, a neighbor, or even a podcast host. These are the things you're not supposed to say or even think if you're a good liberal, a good conservative, or a good citizen. Each week, I'll interview a person who has something bad to say. They might be a journalist or a professor. They might be a porn star or a drug dealer. They might just be an ordinary person with an ordinary job who doesn't care about the rules of polite society. I'm not interested in breaking the rules just to be a troublemaker. I'm interested in people who break the rules of conventional thought and to expand the scope of what is possible to say in our society. I'm interested in people who make me think. I have not done an Ask Me Anything episode in quite a while, and I thought I would change the format a bit. So this time, I will not be the interviewer. There will be a new interviewer for Unregistered. His name is Landry Harmon. He's been working with me for many months now, and he's a brilliant young man, and I think you'll see that he's extremely well-suited for the job. Landry will be conveying questions that were given to me for this session by members of the Unregistered Underground, which is the supporting listeners group for the podcast. If you want to join the Underground so that you can participate in this way in future AMAs, go to unregisteredunderground.com, or you can also click the link below in the description. But right now, here's my interview as the interviewee with the host, Landry Harmon. Well, today is a very special day in Unregistered history for a couple reasons. One is we're doing an Ask Me Anything episode for the first time in a very long time. Can't remember when the last one was. Second reason is that for this AMA and possibly future AMAs, there will be a new host of Unregistered. And here he is, Landry Harmon. Thank you, Landry, for taking over this sacred duty. I am amazed at myself for allowing anyone, I must really like you, to do this. So, Landry, you're going to be asking me questions that have been posed by people who belong to the Unregistered Underground. They've been asking me questions for about a week now on our private Facebook page. If you would like to be one of those very special people, it's very simple and very cheap. Just go to unregisteredunderground.com and become a member at any level, and you can participate in these by asking questions. Landry, though, because he's a very interesting and intelligent young man, is also free to ask his own questions. So I'm ready for this. I'm excited. 130 episodes in as the host, I got to say I'm a little tired. And it's nice to take a break and be the one on the other side. So, Landry, take it away.
All right. So we'll start off first with a question from Tim Finn asking, what personal experiences in your life made you so anti-authority?
Wow. Okay, let's see. So many thoughts cascading into my mind right now. The very first thought I have is Kamala Harris, and that, I know I don't want to jump into contemporary politics, but it is remarkable how much she and a lot of the Democratic primary candidates reminded me of the sort of first authoritarian figures outside, and I said authoritarian figures outside my family, who were like the vice principals in the Berkeley public schools when I was growing up, and then my teachers. It was very multicultural. Most of my teachers after I think about third grade were Black, and a whole bunch of the principals and vice principals were too, or Mexican American. I mean, I don't know if that's important here. I think it is maybe for another story, but they were very authoritarian. That's why Kamala reminds me in part so much of them. Yeah, it was a sort of like not touchy-feely liberal kind of pedagogy that they were practicing in my schools. So I acted out a bit. I was also, I think, acting out because of what was going on at home for me, being from the broken family that I was the class clown all the time. I was completely uninterested in what they were teaching. I think because it didn't make sense to me, it was boring to me, and maybe because I didn't have a lot of respect for them. I don't know why, but I remember being completely uninterested in what was coming at me in terms of the attempts to educate me, but looking for any opportunity to make fun of them and the classroom. And consequently, I got punished a lot. This was starting in like, I think 5th grade was when I started to get into trouble on a regular basis. 5th and 6th grades, 7th and 8th grades. I also was then I became sort of a truant. I would sneak away from school. They would tell this story about, in my algebra class in 8th grade, which was the last period, I hated math especially. And there were these giant louvered windows in the back of the class. And I would keep them open, and you could actually, I would wait for the guy to write a really long equation on the board so his back was turned for a long time. And I would just would turn my body and roll out the window and leave and just go home. So I was being raised, as a lot of people know at that time, by my parents, who were Berkeley lefty radicals. They weren't as radical then, but they were still definitely left-wing and very political. And of course, Berkeley was full of left-wing radicals. It's kind of odd to be talking about it as if I was born and raised in some like Texas football town where all the teachers were football coaches yelling at you. But there was another kind of authoritarianism, right? And I don't know, I don't know. I mean, my brother didn't become sort of anti-authoritarian the way I did. I know that as soon as I got to college, also, I started writing for the newspaper. Oh, I was also became the editor of the newspaper for Berkeley High School, for Berkeley High. And I remember sort of setting out to kind of just piss people off. Like, I really did want to, I had a vengeance about it. I wanted to shake things up. It just sort of felt like there was this community of people, it was a 3,000 student school of all these people who just weren't talking about what was really going on. And it wasn't at that time I had a clear sense. I was 17 years old, but I just felt like there was a lot going on that wasn't being discussed, that was submerged, that was repressed in some way. And I just wanted to poke people. I didn't have the answers because I was so young. I knew so little at that point, but I did know that I wanted to kind of provoke, to get people talking, and to get people talking about the real stuff. And then, and that it's true. I pissed off a lot of people as the editor of the Berkeley High Jacket. And then I became the editor of my college newspaper too, and immediately went after, actually the very first quarter I spent in college, I wrote an expose of the president of the college, which caused a huge uproar. Yeah, I was a big campus. This was not a social justice warrior thing, but I was a big sort of campus political activist kind of guy right away, and a journalist. This is before, a lot of people don't know this, but I wanted to be a journalist before becoming a historian or an academic.
Okay.
And so it's funny, my career is coming back sort of full circle to that. I'm kind of doing it all now, but very much a journalist. So yeah, a lot of reasons. I think I was just pissed off at my parents fundamentally, and pissed off that I was neglected so much, and not just by them, but by sort of all the adults in my life. And wanted, I guess, this is all speculating because I don't know, but there was no recognition of, I guess I felt invisible, and there was no recognition of any of my talents. No one ever said that I was intelligent. No one said I was a good writer. No one said that I should have a career, anything like this at all. I really had no idea until I got into college that I had any ability as an intellectual. Truly, I didn't know. And so I guess I was part of me was provoking just to get attention. Sure. But I don't want to dismiss it as just that. I think it's important for people to be recognized for who they were, and I wasn't at all in my childhood. Since then, of course, I have been. Tremendously, and especially now, that I'm doing what I'm doing. I get an incredible amount. I was just thinking today about how many times people tell me, how important my ideas are to them, and that's just staggering. But I got zero of that, as a kid. And so I had a lot of reason to rebel. I have no reason to rebel now. I feel really wonderful about that now in my life. But, so yeah, there you go. There's some answers, but I don't know exactly.
Yeah, I think it's because in your work, there's a lot of, or in you talking and your podcast, there's a lot of the dichotomy between your disorder at home, and then it's like shackles at school, and you know how your schooling system affected you in that way. I was curious, as a follow-up, do you remember any specific cases about like that president article that you wrote freshman year of college? What was the situation, or what was happening?
The situation that was, well, he was this very corrupt president who actually, it was the college was in New York. Well, sorry, the college was in Ohio, and he had his office in New York City. He lived in New York City.
Oh wow!
So he was a really corrupt guy. And no one liked him, so it was kind of easy pickings for me as a young like freshman wannabe political kind of guy. He ended up retiring though. The next year he quit.
Oh really?
Yeah, he quit. Now I don't want to say it was because of my article, but I know that the article caused a huge uproar in the administration, and I'm sure it had I'm sure it contributed. I mean, it caused like people to really hate him, and so I can't imagine him wanting to stay on because of that. So I think, it probably had something to do with it. But then I continued being active in campus politics. I ran for office on basically the student council. There's 2 student councils there, and I ran for office for both, was on the main student council, which actually at Antioch was so crazy. Antioch College, such a crazy college. They let students sit on the committees that determined whether professors got tenure. Undergraduate students. I was one of them. I was reading the files of professors, and I'm pretty sure did we have a vote? I think we even had a vote as to whether they could get tenure, should get tenure or not. I mean, looking back on it, that's just like appalling, as someone who's been a faculty member.
Yeah.
Gosh, but yeah, so I did that. I had lots of power at an early age. It was a very, very, very small institution. I was a big fish in a very small pond, but I was, as soon as I got to college, I haven't stopped doing what I've been. I mean, since the day I started college, I've been going, and I'm still doing the same thing, basically. In fact, I was just looking at my books. I mean, I have some books, like my philosophy books, Plato and Marx from college right up there. I was just looking at them the other day. I was realizing that's the same books I had in college. So I'm teaching those books now. So yeah, college, it's funny because now I'm Mr. Anti-College, but it's also true that Antioch College for me in the 1980s was totally pivotal, and I don't know if I would be here if I hadn't done that. It was really like it was the way I could sneak in to the intellectual world, being a complete washout as a high school student, because they admitted everybody. And they let you be free. That was the great thing. It was very, very free in terms of the education, the pedagogy, the way they taught. And I took off. So I still have a lot of gratitude for that place, even though politically they're like the opposite of me. But yeah, that's the story there.
All right, awesome.
Paloma Verde CBD has been the sponsor of Unregistered for about 3 months now. And I am so proud to say that dozens, actually I think scores or even, no, actually more than 100, because they're almost in every state now, unregistered listeners are now Paloma Verde customers. Paloma Verde, as I've said to you many times, is an independently owned store out of San Antonio, Texas, run by Vanessa and Carlos Abelar. Now, I think there are many reasons why Paloma Verde has become so popular among our listeners. The most obvious one is that they give us a huge deal that you're just not going to get from other CBD companies. 25% off all of their products. 25% off. You just use the discount code RENEGADE when you go to checkout, okay? On top of that, join their mailing list. You get another 10% off. That's 35% off your first order. And then they put together my 3 favorite Paloma Verde products into what they call the Unregistered Combo Pack, also known colloquially as the Thad Pack. Forgot English. You get gummies, which come in many fruit flavors. I eat way too many of them every week. In fact, I think I'm out of them right now. The soft gels, and depending on how much the lockdown and the political hysteria is getting me down, I use 2 to 3 to 4 of those a day. But my favorite thing, because it works so quickly, is their tincture. And in the combo pack, you get their high potency tincture. When I put a few drops under my tongue, I feel my anxiety melt away pretty quickly, and it also helps me sleep. So go to palomaverdestore.com, use the discount code RENEGADE, get the combo pack, change your life, make it better, and I thank you.
So the next question comes from James Dinneman, and he's basically to move to politics. Basically, is what or why rather do you think that libertarians have a focus on like logical consistency? I think we've kind of talked in the past on Unregistered Live, kind of sort of about the literalism that's very present in your favorite people, libertarians. And I think this also goes to a point of question that I saw you talk about on Twitter a couple of days ago, which was like that logic being this sort of, you can be a postmodernist but still play in different people's logic and then accuse them of things in their own logic as being a hypocrite, etc.
Right.
So I'm curious what you think about, especially when you talk about postmodernism, that this kind of libertarian literalism or rationality kind of squeaks out all the time.
Yeah, this is maybe the primary reason I do not identify as a libertarian. It is probably the primary beef I have with libertarians in general. Very few of them like what I have to say about postmodernism and truth and reality. And I have always found that perplexing, since they're the ones who taught me that economic value is subjective, according to Ludwig von Mises and others in the famed Austrian school. But that's a very long conversation that I've had with Bob Murphy and other people. So why is it they're so attracted to this scientistic kind of thinking, rationalism, enlightenment thought? Why are they so hostile to the idea that, wow, maybe there is no truth and maybe we should just be agnostic about truth? That's such a mild, simple, non-threatening idea, yet so people are so threatened by it. It's very interesting. It's like, I said this before, I'm the guy who's argued that slaves in the United States were more free than free white people culturally. I'm the guy who argued that prostitutes were the first feminists in a meaningful way in this country. I've made so many provocative, controversial arguments, but it's this one that pisses the most people off and really gets them screaming at me when I just say, hey, like, maybe there is no truth, like, why, in fact, maybe we should adopt that, since no one's proven that there's truth, that sort of general attitude toward the world. And libertarians, I would say, are among the most pissed off about this. I guess because they come out of economics, right? So libertarians, that's one way in which they're unique among the political ideologies. They tend to be focused primarily on economics, and they tend to have economics backgrounds because of that. And I think they tend to be quite brilliant on economics, and I've learned an incredible amount from libertarians on economics and on economic policy. Yes, I look a lot like a libertarian because of that. But then again, I mean, the Austrian school was all about, another thing they're all about is, they're opposed, as I understand it, opposed to the counting, the mathematics, the rationalization, in a sense, that's good with
neoclassical,
the quantification, all that stuff, and so I think it feels to me like the Austrian school should be completely sympathetic to postmodernism and me and this set of ideas that I'm bringing here, but they're not. I guess the other reason is that, and I think about this a lot, I think about sort of like what's going on recently, the riots, the Black Lives Matter discourse, COVID, and then, we have wildfires right now, and California's I'm sitting under a blanket of red sky right now. It's horrible here, but, and everybody, of course, is saying it's climate change. So, and, so George Floyd, we know, died of a fentanyl overdose, not from getting choked, but at the same time, I am totally opposed to the cops in general. So but, so it's like, half the country or more sees it as a clear-cut case of murder and that he was choked out, and it won't matter if I show them the toxicology report and the coroner's report. And then the other half of the country, I guess, sees it as, something else, as not a murder, and the cop was in the right, as whatever, And this is kind of the great postmodernist question, right? It's like, well, which side is wrong, or is one of the sides wrong? I mean, but I guess because so much left-wing discourse is weaponized and it's hostile, and because I feel like I'm the target as just a person who's not part of the cathedral. I guess I get frustrated with what I see as like deliberate willful ignorance on their part and a lot of dishonesty. So, I mean, here's how I'd say it. I mean, within the realm of discourse that we commonly accept in our culture, that our culture accepts, within the epistemology, the way of knowing that is commonly accepted among Americans in 2020, right? The way that we talk in general,
Right.
you know, George Floyd was
Right.
not murdered by the cops. He wasn't. And so they're just wrong. And it's like that they can find that out very quickly. You know, they can look that up. Anybody can look that, but they won't. And they'll never. I mean, they still think that Mike Brown had his hands up and said, don't shoot. And we pretty much know that he didn't. Yet again, like, but there are positive things to say about Michael Brown and what he did. And, you know, but it's that there's just so much deliberate distortion of what is commonly accepted as objective facts, right? So we have what is commonly accepted as objective facts, according to anybody who's using the scientific method. You know, George Floyd was not killed by the cops, but the left wing doesn't care. And I actually think when it comes to race, I've seen this happen. I've seen this happen where they know that something's false around race, but they will still repeat it because they'd rather speak something that's not true. And be on the right side of the race question, especially. I mean, there's an incredible amount of like cognitive distortion and dissonance that goes on in the white liberal and left wing mind, and even for that matter, even in the conservative, you know, white people's minds in general around race. We tie ourselves into knots, and especially those of us who want to be on the right side of the race question, you know, not be associated with a racist history of the United States in any way. This is, by the way, Shelby Steele's argument, is that the main thing that white Americans are afraid of is being associated in any way with its racist past, right? Because our racist past, our racist history is so famous. That's all we talk about. American history, you know, school kids today, they all know who Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks were. And they even know, you could even say a few things about who they were and what they did. They don't know anything about the rest of American history, really. I mean, nothing, including the president. I don't care too much about that. But so, there's obsession with race to a degree. I mean, people have called it psychotic. You know, the white American liberal, especially, obsession with race has always been psychotic in a way, but it's now become it's gone to another level. So I don't know how to talk to these people anymore.
I think it's like liberalism to me, and then, you know, especially being on a college campus, I've kind of gotten more intimate with people like this, is that it's a politics of vanity, right? Is that like they just care about appearances, they care about having the right, you know, having the 1619 Project book back. It's much more about being counter to like conservatives, counter to country bumpkins, counter to bad ideas, counter to like racism or anything like that, rather than even being like a positive notion of anything. Like, it's just like, we have the right program, we have the right ideas, and it's really oppositional in its like usage. And especially today, of just like how quick it is to assume these very nuanced stories, right? You see, it's so interesting how quick people are like quick draw to have opinions on issues we have no facts on the table, really. And then when things come out, it's just like, you know, the conversation's not there anymore. You know, it's sort of past.
Yeah. Another reason why I've become less and less enthusiastic about democracy. You know, and I had an anti-democratic critique for many, many years long before I came across libertarians, which I've said many times, which is that it just requires too much work for me. I'm not interested in like running society. Thank you very much. Yeah. Democracy is government by the people, right? That's the definition of it. Well, I don't want to govern. So you're going to have to, you know, I'd rather someone else govern. But, you know, but then the libertarians came along and they were like, oh, there's another reason to hate democracy, which is like, look at these people around you, right? And look at their ideas and their knowledge of the world in particular, right? And their knowledge of politics. And then they're going to decide, they're going to make decisions that will directly affect you, that could destroy you if they want, right? It's a terrifying thought. So, you know, on November 4th or whatever it is, you know, that's the day when we find out which mob will rule.
Yeah.
Look at the two main sides right now. I mean, You know, I mean, to say that the Trump people look like the rational ones tells you a lot about what's going on. I mean, I know.
Right.
A lot of the Trump people are stone cold fools, right? I mean, in all kinds of
Yeah.
ways, right? Yet they're much more rational, right, these days than I think most of the Democrats. This rush to judgment, you know, before like weighing any of the evidence or even just thinking about it, or you know, I I run into it with my family. A member of my family who lives here, I was at their house for dinner a week ago, and the pandemic came up, and I just said something about how, you know, there's actually very few deaths now, and we flattened the curve a long time ago, and I don't quite understand why we saw it. And I said something about how they were like storming into restaurants to shame white people, you know, the Black Lives Matter people were, and they didn't know they didn't know. And I said, well, that's because they don't report those things on MSNBC, which is what these people want. And it was church, you know, look, it's like I was raised in a church. This place is one big church, the Bay Area, you know, East Bay, New York, Los Angeles, parts of Los Angeles, Portland, Seattle, you know, there's a church in the United States that's the progressive liberal church, and people who live in it, they all have the same basic ideas, and they think the people who don't have those ideas either have a characterological flaw, some childhood trauma or something that caused this characterological flaw. Because there's no other explanation for why someone would be skeptical about climate change, or George Floyd's death or something like that, right? I mean, honestly, it's assumed that I'm a bad person to raise questions about those things. That's just like Christian thinking, you know. There's no difference. So I mean, there's the devil's world, right? And the devil's world has Fox News in it, and the devil's world has Trump in it, and the devil's world has, you know, Bull Connor and the famous racists from the past in it, and it's all in the same world, right? And then it also has and then libertarians are even sort of in part of that world too. They're like kind of less scary, but they're still put over there. And so if you're part of that world in any way, to people on the liberal left, there's no point in talking to you. It's dangerous to talk to you. In fact, it's my experience.
And this, it's the sleight of hand of the cathedral, I guess you could call it, which is make liberal people believe that they're not religious, right? Like, I think that's the worst aspect, is that they don't even know, you know, they think they're the secular, they think they're the progressive, they're the cosmopolitan, they're on the right side of history. And, you know, at least like with conservative people, they know, I talk to my parents or my grandparents, like they know they're being presented with a perspective, right? They know they're being, but I feel like with liberals, they're just like, these are the facts. And it's just like this weird sense of objectivity, and then also combined with self-righteousness that makes it just such a toxic combination.
So I have to give
my social force.
I have to give the lecture that I've given a few times in a few places. I've thought about this thing for a long time, that liberalism, what we call liberalism now, has had the moral high ground, right, in the society. It does have the moral high ground now, right? It is assumed by most, not everybody, not in certain counties in Alabama, I'm sure, but certainly in the media, certainly in academia, certainly in elite institutions, in the elite on the coasts, right, in the big cities, right? Meaning where the power is, where state power is, where cultural power is, it is assumed that liberals are the good people. Good people can make mistakes, like, you know, the Vietnam War.
right.
But Lyndon Johnson was still one of us. He was still a good person.
Yeah.
Liberals can make mistakes, like they can drop nuclear bombs on cities full of civilians. But Harry Truman, he was our family. He was a good man. He was a good man who made a very bad mistake. Okay. You know, I could go on, right? I mean, so that's, you know, Obama, that's what was said about Obama when it turned out that he was droning children. You know, it was, mistakes. It was mistakes.
Right.
It was mistakes, but he's a great man. Trump calls for ending endless wars, as he did this last Monday on Labor Day, and I just wrote a piece about it for Roca News, by the way.
Right.
The most stunning, the most radical anti-war statement ever by a president by far. I mean, not even close.
Yeah, of course.
And he gets denounced by liberals. So it's because he's a bad guy. He's a bad guy.
Yeah.
If he does a good thing, it doesn't matter because he's part of the devil's side. He's playing for the devil's team. And it really is like team sports to them, I think also. It's a tribe, team sports, tribalism, it's that kind of thing.
Tribal.
Too. Which, Republicans do the same thing, don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
But
right.
it's that the Democrats have held the high ground, the moral high ground in elite circles where policy is actually thought up and determined. Okay,
right.
Public policy is invented, right, and carried out in institutions, namely academia and state capitals, right? Those are largely controlled by liberals, right? In the big states and certainly nationally, right?
Right.
If you're a conservative or a liberal, if you're just not a liberal, you have to sort of prove that you're a good person before you can make an argument.
A lot of throat clearing.
You've got to prove that you're a decent, good person who cares about people to make an argument, right? Or else you.
Right.
So that's weird, given that we know America's horrific racist past and sexist and homophobic past, right? So something did actually happen. It's true. The United States of America as a culture, as a national culture, was tremendously racist and sexist and homophobic, certainly according to our standards, right? At a certain time, which was before World War II. So before World War II, it was totally normal to make anti-Semitic jokes, even in front of Jewish people, and be all for quotas against Jewish admissions to schools and stuff like that. Scientific racism, as of the 1930s, was still the dominant way of thinking about race. It was being challenged but it was still the dominant way of thinking. There are certain races of people: the Negroid, the Caucasoid, the Mongoloid, the Asiatic, whatever, and there's a hierarchy among them. And it was still commonly believed that Jews and Italians and Slavs were closer to Negroes, or actually Negroes, than they were whites, right? And the immigration law on the books at the time in the 1930s, which was passed in 1924, said just did just that, blocked immigration from all these parts of Europe because they were in part considered to be inferior races, large part, right?
Yeah.
So, and then women had only just then gotten the vote, right? So, and in many states, wives did not have any rights within the marriage, property rights within the marriage. So, fundamentally, systemic. And I haven't even talked about, Jim Crow yet, right? So Jim Crow too, fundamentally systemic, undeniable racism and sexism. And I haven't talked about how it was a common practice to round up gays in bars and take them down into the police station every weekend, right? No doubt about it, right? The way the left talks about society now, our society now, is exactly what it looked like then,
Right.
Now, so why is it then that Donald Trump, who's like hardly even offensive compared to most of our uncles, right? Most of our uncles.
Right.
We all have multiple uncles who are more embarrassing, or cousins or somebody. We all know many, many people who would be more embarrassing in those ways than Donald Trump. Why is it that the entire system, the establishment, is allergic to him? Like he's a virus, and they're just antibodies just trying to push him out of the body politic, right, as fast as they can. It's because they have this Manichaean, black and white, moralistic, and I'm going to say secular Christian, meaning there's no God in it, but it's the same moral structure, right? View of the world and of human relations. There are bad people and good people.
Right.
When I was growing up, Republicans were simply bad people. I know. I mean, we all thought that way. We all thought that way. And Democrats were disappointing because they were supposed to do better, but they just kept accidentally just nuking, poor brown peasants in faraway countries and accidentally sending social workers into black women's homes and telling them how to live their lives, and just accidentally building the border fence, et cetera, and pretending they had nothing to do with it. And and accidentally passing the 1994 crime bill and incarcerating, millions of black people and white people and brown people. Those are
Right.
accidents done by good people. But the
Yeah,
Republicans,
exactly.
the thing about the Republicans, Landry, is that they don't care about people. And this is the amazing thing that I just kept hearing over and over again, right?
Yeah.
And believing it. It's like they care about people, but we don't. First of all, it's like what a hilarious, like, adolescent narcissistic claim to make. I care about people.
Mm.
I mean, just
Right.
think about how apt, but that's precisely what they say. So anyway, the reason all this flipped and the liberals gained the moral high ground was World War II. So this was
Okay.
it. So World War II happens. The United States and Britain their primary problem with the Nazis and the Japanese was control over those giant portions of the globe. The German government and the Japanese government were threatening to close off Central Europe and the Pacific Rim to trade with the United States. The Germans were definitely, and the Japanese were looking that way, right? And that was what they were worried about primarily. And this is well documented. This is probably close to a consensus view among historians. That was Roosevelt's primary concern. It wasn't about saving the poor Chinese or saving the poor Jews or any of that.
Right.
So they had to launch a war, though, to stop Japan and Germany from seizing control of those major parts of the economic sphere. Then they had to justify it, though, because most Americans didn't understand geopolitics. They didn't know where Japan or Germany were. They barely know who Hitler was at that point, right? And so it became a war about race. World War II became a war about race. Now, they don't mention the Japanese part, except that's one of the main justifications for the Pacific War, is that the Japanese were this horribly racist nation that committed racist atrocities against China, against the Chinese people and Koreans and Vietnamese and all of them, but especially the Chinese, right? And of course, the Nazis became the symbol of human evil, and their chief crime was their racism against Jews, right? And they drafted a whole legion of academics, anthropologists, and others, Margaret Mead, Ruth Benedict, all these people, Franz Boas, to basically create this idea that, yes, there are different races of people, but they're all equal, and we should all get along, and we should all be equal, be treated equally, which was racial liberalism. Then at the same time, a guy named Gunnar Myrdal, who was a Swedish social scientist who came to the United States and wrote this huge multi-volume work on race in America in 1944, it was published, argued that blacks must be given civil rights and full citizenship, but they must also, in exchange for that, adopt the norms of the dominant society, dominant culture, white people. He said this explicitly in that book. And so that's racial liberalism. And by the end of the war, we were the great heroes because we won the worst war in human history. We defeated the worst people in human history, the Nazis and the evil Japanese Empire. We saved democracy. We saved the world, the United States, right? So, and we also came out of it the most powerful country, right? So we were the hero nation and the superpower at the same time. We get to determine at that moment what people think about everything. Right. So in Japan, we occupied them with our military, right? And we absolutely controlled what their education was. Across Europe, across Western Europe, we controlled the education system. They were taught, what we wanted them to be taught. And racism became, or anti-racism became, sort of the religion of this new global world order, that with the United States at the top of it and the United Nations just under it, right, controlled all by the United States. But that became the justification for the biggest war, for the pivot of the whole 20th century. So they couldn't just give that up. And then along comes Martin Luther King and the Civil Rights Movement. And at that point, the United States is in a different war, a Cold War with the Soviet Union. And the main thing that they were competing for at that moment in the late 50s and early 60s was control over African nations that were all becoming independent, right? They were in the midst of their anti-colonial struggles, and many of those African nations were becoming independent. And here's the Soviet Union ready to give them a bunch of money and guns, and here's the United States ready to give them a bunch of money and guns too. But you have on television, You have pictures of black people with dogs biting them and hoses pushing them down the street, getting hit by billy clubs by white cops in Alabama, right? And so the argument goes by some historians is that the federal government of the United States, Kennedy and Johnson in particular, understood that to win the Cold War, to convince Africans to join with the United States against the Soviet Union, you had to give these Negroes back here their civil rights, because this was not looking good in those villages and those huts in Africa. People huddled around one little television set in the village in Africa. Seeing black people getting their asses kicked in Alabama was not good for American foreign policy vis-a-vis the Soviet Union, right? And so that's why many have argued Kennedy and Johnson ended up favoring civil rights and supporting that legislation, Civil Rights Act of 64, Voting Rights Act of 65. So, and also further enshrining anti-racism as the civil religion of this, one of the civil religions of this country.
Right. I think so. Yeah, I think that's such a great, like, essentially the origin story, right, is the World War II. We defeated the worst people on earth, right? Don't pay attention to any of the U.S. war crimes, but we defeated the worst people. And then we also saved the world from the worst depression ever in human history, right? So it's both the economic, it's both the racial, and also war and nationality, etc. Going off of this point, someone basically said, Drake Lundstrom asks, why do you think people on the left are so resistant to changing their minds, even on arguments that have been incredibly thoroughly destroyed, such as like the gender wage gap, I'm assuming he's talking about, and rent control, which is, rent control is something most economists agree with. Is there's a Swedish economist just died recently, Asser, I forgot his last name, but he talks about how the worst way to destroy a city block besides bombing it is rent control. So it's very interesting how why do people hold to these ideas, you think, as a former member of the left?
Last I saw, 97% of economists believe that rent control is a terrible idea. I think that number is held pretty consistent in surveys of economists. And just, it doesn't take, you don't have to be an economic genius to understand why it's bad for poor people, why rent control is bad for poor people. But you're right. It's astonishing. It's like rent control is one of those ideas. It's like coated in Teflon for the left. It just, any criticism just slides right off of it. I guess because, I don't know. I guess because you have to actually spend some time thinking about the indirect down the line consequences of rent control to understand why it's bad for poor people. In the immediate, it looks like it favors the landlord, right? And so I think, by placing, again, this comes down to the Manichaean left-wing mind, right? It looks like you're aligning yourself with the landlord by being against rent control, because the landlord under rent control can't raise his rents, right? Of course, the landlord's going to be opposed to this. So that means if you're opposed to rent control, you're for the landlord. Remember, there's good and evil, Landry.
Right.
And landlords are definitely evil in the left-wing mind, right? They are among the worst kinds of capitalists, right? Because they control housing.
Yes.
So important, right? So, yeah, I think it's freaking Christian. It's this Christian idea of good and evil, and evil inhabiting people and good inhabiting other people. And so if you associate yourself in any way, align yourself in any way with landlords, because it's true, landlords are opposed to rent control, as am I. But I'm opposed to rent control, not for the landlords. I'm opposed to rent control for people like me who can't afford the damn rent in San Francisco, right? So I think that's what it is. You are associating yourself with the capitalists, and the worst capitalists. I think that's it. And
I think because it's interesting I think now we're seeing the right-wing version of this being like trade wars, for example, which is like, it's so interesting to see, people in the Trump administration and people on Fox News that were, Reaganites, they were, free trade or whatever. This kind of corporatist free trade at the very least. Now say, oh, the red Chinese, they're taking our intellectual property and, we have to do this stuff, even though, they've been like the biggest missionaries for the free trade idea, which has, I would argue, transform the world. And if there's anything that brings China and America together, it's market ties, right? And I think the elimination of those is also scary. I think that's a story of this Trump administration that's not being played as much as it should be, because that opens the road for more antagonism, and we're already seeing that with consulates being shut down, etc.
So Trump, even though he just said this fantastic anti-war thing on Monday, and I gave him his due in my piece for Roka News about it, he's also helping the Saudis conduct a genocidal campaign against the people of Yemen as we speak. It's disgusting. Killing civilians by incredible numbers, and using drones all across the Middle East and Africa, killing all sorts of people. We don't even know about half of them, but we know that drone strikes have increased tremendously under Trump. I'm trying to remember sorry, I forgot the question.
No. All I'm saying is that like this.
I got it. I'm sorry.
It's bipartisan. It's a bipartisan instinct now.
I do remember now. I do remember now. So like, and yet like the left, I think MSNBC covered the Yemen war for about a week or so, maybe. There was a minute there, when it became news, and like the New York Times reported on it for sure for like a week or two, maybe. And they haven't since, right? This is Trump. This is like his stuff. And I'm like, hey guys, listen, can we talk about the Trump's genocidal war against Yemen? And they're like, no. Did you see what he said about so-and-so? Did you see that name he called? It's their obsession with civility, respectability, his personality, his personality flaws. Trump's personality is far more important than any of his policies. Obama's personality, the same, was far more important than any of his policies. Liberals loved Obama mostly because of his personality. They didn't pay attention to his policies. The same is true for Trump. It's just that they loved one and hated the other. They loved how cool and suave and black Obama was, and they hate how gross and disgusting and white Trump is. So and then on trade, yes, exactly. Like, people accuse me of being like a Trump sympathizer or an enabler or something, or what's a collaborator. I was called a collaborator. Like thank you. Like in Vichy France, thank you very much. I won't get shot for that. But no, I'm like, okay, no, it's what I say, genocidal war. Is that a compliment to the guy? Yeah, no, and that was just part of his foreign policy, right? Trade, his trade ideas, and I don't know the policies as well as the foreign policies, but I certainly know his ideas, and I know some of the policies. Idiotic, terrible, stupid, wrong, and antagonizing China instead of like making China is people talk about poverty, global poverty, reducing radically, and most of that being in China, which is true. It's like the Chinese, by introducing market reforms in China, eliminated a ton of poverty in their own country, but they also eliminated a different kind of poverty in our country. Okay. So this is really important. So economists constantly, left-wing economists especially, will talk about wages being flat over time, which may or may not be true. And even if it's true, though, right, and income being flat over time for the working class, and that may not be true, but let's say it is true, okay? Nonetheless, it doesn't matter. The poorest people in this country, the working class in this country, right, the bottom 50% live way, 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 way better than the bottom 50% did 50 years ago. And that is in large part because of all the cheap goods coming in from China that they can buy at Walmart, which the left also hates because it's tacky.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's stay on that point for a second. I mean that. I think the left actually spends so much time attacking Walmart because they find it distasteful in terms of what they sell. And but then they need to go after their labor practices and their environmental practices and the fact that they're the richest people on earth, right? These things that are like irrelevant to people who actually shop at Walmart, whose lives are so much better because of just Walmart, right? And that's just Walmart. Target too, right? I mean, all the stores that, all these goods that we can now own that make our lives so much better that come out of China because of their market reforms and because of relative free trade between the two countries until Trump comes along. Right. But we can't talk about that because, again, the church won't allow it, because the church is so upset that we elected a pope who like picks his nose.
Right.
That's what it is. They're so upset that we elected a pope who picks his nose. And we must mobilize the entire church to get rid of this pope and replace him with a good pope.
It's like an Avignon papacy. It's like it's so interesting. The people that consistently always call Trump a fascist, which again, how is he a fascist? It's like Mussolini made the trains run on time. I mean, Trump is not, he's not some well-oiled bureaucrat, right? It's like, no. I don't even know where that critique comes from, but it's like the summation of the liberal critique is almost get off the golf course and go back to bombing the Yemenis. It's like what the amount of time they talk about what he's doing or what Melania, his wife, is wearing. It's just like, again, it's this politics of vanity. And it's just like, and if we're talking about silence being violence, how about we talk about their silence about the crisis in Yemen, right? Yeah, it's like, where are they talking about that?
Right.
It's, it's a horrible,
Yeah, it was someone in, we had the RU Live with, I think it was Scott Horton recently. Okay. And it was Carlos from San Antonio. It was actually, he said,
right.
Because we were talking about, of course, historically, the United States has thought of itself as the world's police officer. Right. And historically, that's the big thing. Right. And Carlos made the brilliant point because, now we're talking about abolish the police. That's the big term these days. And he was like, well, why don't we abolish the global cop too? Abolish the global police, the United States empire too. And I was like, whoa. But the left won't do that. When they talk about abolish the police, it's only about racist cops. But anyway.
Right.
So, yeah, it sure is frustrating having been born into the church as I was. You were born into a different church. I was born into this church. And it's very, frankly, it's just a hard life. Being always ostracized by your people, in my case, it's my family and the people I grew up with. In fact, I just today, was it today on Facebook? Some friend of mine in college said I was an asshole because I said something about George Floyd that wasn't correct. Or Black Lives Matter, I think. He just said, yeah, Thad's an asshole. I was like, Granville, what the hell, man? We were like buddies in 1985. We're just because of politics. So I get that treatment all the time. I'm considered to be like, there's something wrong with me. And it's funny because, I don't identify as a libertarian, and I think most of my ideas come off as radically left wing. When you talk about war, bring all the troops home tomorrow. Like, you can't get more left wing than that. Slash the defense budget by about 90%. I'd say reduce the American military to a truly defensive instrument, right? Which I think is take about 10% of the budget to do that, right?
Yeah.
Talk about radical. Immigration, I've said this many times, open borders, forget it. No borders whatsoever. No nation state. Where does that place me? On prisons, release every single nonviolent offender right now. Eliminate all the drug laws, all of them. Eliminate all the sex work laws, all of them. Where does that put me? I don't know. I'm even kind of for UBI, universal basic income. Like, I think it might crash the economy, but I'm really interested in it. Like, I would love for it to work. So the one thing I am not is conservative or right wing. There is nothing about my thinking that is conservative or right wing. Nothing.
Yeah.
Nothing.
Yeah.
The right wing has been about the nation state. The right wing has been about conserving tradition. The right wing has often, for those reasons, been hostile to markets because the markets are disruptive of tradition and culture and traditional culture, right?
Yeah. Right.
There's nothing about my thinking that's I've interviewed. The only thing I would say is consistent is there's a strand of classically conservative thinking that's anti-imperialist, which I really like, in Edmund Burke, and then Daniel McCarthy, who I had on the show. He lays this out beautifully, right? There's an actual anti-imperialist tradition, which sort of Trump is reviving in a way. But other than that, who's the real left winger? This is kind of what I'm doing here. I look at the left wing, and obviously I don't like any of it. And I feel like I'm the true left winger. I'm the only one.
Yeah.
And then I look at libertarians, and it's kind of the same thing. I feel like I'm the only real libertarian too. It's like, you guys need to like read some Foucault and like embrace some cultural freedom too, like not just be interested in tax policy.
Right.
I don't know. Maybe that just is my own narcissism speaking, or my own self-aggrandizement, or I don't know, megalomania. But I look at both ideologies and the people who sort of run them, and especially with the left. I mean, the libertarians I'm much more sympathetic to. But even there, I'm just like, God, you guys, like, I feel like I'm just more libertarian than you guys are. It's very odd. And with the left, for sure, like, I don't see how they don't stand for the people. They don't stand for the underdog. They're not on the side of the oppressed. They're not.
Right.
They're clearly not.
Right.
I mean, in no way are they. By the way, what's one of the major effects of COVID? The lockdown, I should say, not COVID. The lockdowns perpetrated primarily by Democratic governors on the economy, on the state, on the structure of the economy. What is it? It's a massive upward transfer of wealth.
Yeah.
Small independent businesses are closing down, and Amazon is doing fantastically well, right?
Right.
And all those closed businesses, who is most likely to be able to replace them? It's going to be corporate chains. And so, good job, everybody. Who thinks this is like somehow for the people. Yeah. So that's where I am. I'm like, I'm so alone, Landry. What can I tell you? Like, there's nobody. Bridget Fedesi has been on the show. Bridget Fedesi, that's kind of her theme. Like, who's on the show. She talks about she's politically homeless. It's like, honey, you don't even know, because she's only been political for about 7 years. Like, it's been, for me, it's now going on since it's like about 25 years. I've considered myself outside the left. I left the church. I left the church about 25 years ago. So it's been a long time. Yeah.
You talked about how in the 90s, right, there's like a shift on the left that really made you, what was that point, what was like that breaking point for you when you kind of divorced the left, or so to speak? Not to Dave Rubin it, but go ahead.
Yeah, no. The 90s was when it happened. Yeah. Well, I had a friend who was also in graduate school. His name is Jonathan Cutler. He deserves tremendous credit. He's a professor of sociology at Wesleyan University. He hasn't published a lot. He doesn't write op-eds. He's not very public. So if you look him up, you won't find much. He wrote a great book on labor. But he and I, at that time, we were both grad students, really young, and we were both in the left. We're active. And we actually were organizing a huge conference, labor teach-in at Columbia in 1997. But I was very dissatisfied with the left in all kinds of ways. I couldn't figure it out. And he just sort of helped me think through it. At that time, the big fight on the left is still going on. And it's basically the fight between identity politics on the one hand and old Marxist class-based politics on the other hand. That is still the main fight that goes on the left. And I don't mean liberals. I'm talking about lefties, like radicals,
Right. True left.
And so, that's when that emerged. That fight started in the 1990s. So you had in the 1990s in academia, which is where the left is centered, by the way. There is no left outside of academia, right? The unions, trade unions is the only place. Academia and trade unions. Now, where I'm talking about radical leftists, right? Okay.
Right.
So that the old Marxist way of thinking was still dominant, which was that once we resolve the class contradictions in society, in capitalist society, once we have economic equality, or the more economic equality we have, the less racism and sexism and homophobia we will have. The racism and sexism and homophobia and those things emerge from class conditions, from economic inequality, from the exploitation of the proletariat, from the immiseration of the working class, etc. People who are exploited act out in various ways. These are ways in which they act out that are irrational. But these are irrational ideas, and class and economics is the real rational base of society. So look for your answers at the economic base of society, not at all these ephemeral ideas floating above the air. That's the Marxist class analysis. And then along comes, in the beginning in the 80s, but they really took off in the 90s, this whole new crew, a lot of it was driven by affirmative action. So you had like black scholars coming into the academy in large numbers, and women had been coming in for a while, who start to like
Right.
write black history, which was just adding black people to the narrative. And they started writing women's history, which was just adding women to the narrative. And then they started then coming up with new theories like critical race theory about, why
Right.
and how race was constructed in the society and how it was deployed in various ways. And their theories were often independent of economics and independent of the class structure of society, independent of capitalism. And so the old left, the old Marxist influenced left, looked at this kind of with horror and thought it was just plain stupid. And, it's funny, in that fight at the time, I was on the side of the identity politics people, and I still kind of am. So this fight still plays out today. This is Bernie Sanders. This was Bernie Sanders' whole problem that he had to deal with when he came out in 2016 and was gaining steam, because he comes from the old Marxist class-based left. And that was Bernie's argument for decades, was that once we solve the economic inequality in this country, racism will fade away, right? And, black people in this country are still disproportionately poor, but they certainly have advanced economically quite a bit. And Bernie would say, well, I don't know what he would say, but, racism has also declined tremendously. So there's actually an argument to be made there. I mean, I think, and I think most rational people think, that racism has declined radically since 1965 or so, but you wouldn't know it from the way people are talking these days. So, but anyway, so and then Black Lives Matter was emerging at right that moment, and they jumped literally on the stage with Bernie when he was in Phoenix, and then when he was in Seattle that year, and like black women shouted him down and said, "No, you must incorporate." And the very next day, Bernie was like, "Oh yes, racism is super important on its own as its own issue, and it must be addressed separately and independently," right?
Yeah.
So I don't like that. I mean, racism is an invention, right? It's a set of ideas. It's invented, and it's therefore reinvented constantly, and it changes all the time, but it's being reinvented. It's just a set of ideas. And so it's not like a river or a forest or 27 steel factories in Pittsburgh pumping out X number of, I-beams per day, right? It's very amorphous and mutable. It changes constantly, right? And yet they treat it as if it's this god, this evil god. Racism is this evil god that's always hovering over us and waiting to strike and do sinister things and bad things in history and make history and determine history on its own. It's like this sort of a spiritual, superstitious belief about racism, and sexism gets treated that way as well. Feminists talk about feminism and feminists talk about sexism in that way as well. It's like this thing that's independent of history, right? Rather than something that gets created and recreated constantly as a set of ideas. So, that makes sense?
Awesome. So now we're gonna, it makes sense. Yeah.
Good.
We're gonna turn the show into a quick episode of Loveline. We have a question asking about what advice would you give young men if the woman they are dating turns out to be a social justice warrior or, woke or whatever. Have you had any, because Columbia days or whatever, how did you go about discussing politics and relationships? How quick do you bring it up? Or like, what was sort of your philosophy about that? Or today,
Well, I've had, so I am old, just so you know. And so I have had a lot of relationships, and a lot of relationships since my Columbia days. And in, I think, every case, every single case, they were some kind of liberal. Now, the thing was, I've never been attracted to academics. I've never been attracted to professional intellectual types. I definitely only date women who are intelligent. Like they need to be highly intelligent. They've all been very smart, and that's very attractive. But being an intellectual the way that I am, I find to be not so attractive. And at least I don't want to necessarily be around it. I think because I'm around it so much, I can't imagine like doing this all day long and then at night doing it again. Like, I don't know. But
Right.
so, there's been some tensions around politics. It depends. Some of them have been more amenable to it than others. I think
Right.
I've influenced a lot of people I've been with. They've told me, and their
Yeah.
politics have changed. Go if they're like. So I've never dated someone you would call a social justice warrior. No
Okay.
chance. None of them. No, none of them were like that.
Yeah.
That I think is untenable. I don't see that happening. If you have different politics, I don't see dating them even if you have the same politics,
Right.
because they're so obsessed with self-flagellation and so enmeshed in this like sadomasochistic politics. That's how I see it. It's all about shaming and moralizing, and then like feeling, and then shaming and moralizing against yourself, and like it's this incredibly like psychologically violent politics, which is maybe why they talk about things like silence being violence, because they're constantly like hitting each other and hitting themselves. And
Yeah.
it seems like it would be no fun to be in a romantic relationship with someone like that. And again, like I've known tons of those people, right? When I was on the left, that's who I knew. I knew political activists, I wouldn't date a political activist ever. That's a horrible idea.
Right.
Someone who's that obsessed with
Right.
one thing, no matter what it is, it's not
Yeah.
a life I want, and here I am, a political guy, obviously, but
Yeah.
on my show, I try to, like, you and I have talked mostly about politics, but on my show, I talk about everything, and I try hard to talk about just personal stuff with people.
Yeah.
And to me, those are the most rewarding parts of the show. When people reveal
100%.
Things about themselves that they don't talk about otherwise, that are not about
Yeah.
politics necessarily. It's a diminished life. It's a very narrow, diminished life, the political life. So I don't recommend it. At the same time, as I said on Unregistered Live last night, there's this great line. I don't know who said this, but someone said, "You may not care about politics, but politics cares about you." And so, unfortunately, if you don't want to find yourself, at war or in a prison or losing your job or losing your business or getting taxed into bankruptcy all of a sudden, you do need to kind of pay attention to it. And it's too bad, because it's a dirty business and it's not a lot of fun, but it's about power and fighting and meanness. But unfortunately, that's what's got to go on if we're all going to inhabit the same place. There's going to be some contests for power and resources and space, and you name it. There's going to be some fights. There's conflict, and we have to figure out how to resolve it. So
yeah, I think one thing about this kind of issue is I think of the polls that you see from like 1950s to now about how important religion was to who you married, and how important politics was, and how they're basically inverse, right? And to me, that's not like, oh, we became more secular. It's just like politics is the new religion, right? And it's like, especially with these people that's like, they are true zealots, and they can only think about these things. That is like, they need to convert to be with them. So I think you're right. I think there's just, at this point, it's just so consumed everything that there's going to be a point when like there's just some people that are just going to be untenable. So if there are like active social justice warrior, they're going to their white fragility book clubs, like that level of activity where it's like, people can be with people that are generally, woke. Because I think just if you go to any college, go to any city, you're going to have people who are like, they're not political, but they want to have the right opinions, which predominantly are left and increasingly woke opinions. But if they're active in their belief and they work it out, and they're always talking about it, then that's like, I think, a completely untenable situation.
I mean, I guess it'd be sort of like an Orthodox Jew dating like a Christian conservative who believes that the Jews killed Christ.
Right.
Which is, exactly. By the way, not a bad interpretation either. By the way, I think the Jews did have something to do with killing Christ, according to the story, anyway. So, like, but if you have, because it's not just a Jew dating a Christian, right? It's an antagonistic thing. It's the social justice warrior thinks that you, Landry, are a bad person for being silent or for not being aware of your white privilege, or you name it, right? You're being bad. You're actively being bad, and you're actively being told that you're bad. So it's not just that we have different worldviews. It's that this other person actually thinks you're a bad person. So why would you ever want to be with that person?
Right.
I mean,
Yeah.
that's what
It's
I would.
like they and it.
I'm
You know,
sorry.
John McWhorter's best on this is it's the fallen state, right? It's this like, and how many arguments I've had or seen where it's like you just need to do the work. You just need to read the right books from the right people, and it's like that is the most religious. It's like whenever like I as a kid questioned, I had some doubts about my religion or whatever.
Right.
But like no, you just need to pray. You know, just your doubts are part of the process, and you just got to pray harder. You got to read the Bible more frequently, and you got to deepen your relationship with Christ. That's the exact same thing that I see out of these people from the left. It's just like it is this religious instinct of, and
Bingo.
I need to do the work. I need to do the work is I think one of the most totalitarian statements you could say, because it's like I can't give you this knowledge or this argument. I can't argue it for you. You have to receive it. You have to like believe it, you know, to make it incarnate within your own thinking, and then you'll be a changed man.
Well, it's the assumption. It's brilliant, by the way. It's the assumption that the truth is in the book.
Right.
You know,
Right.
completely
Text.
dead on, man. Yes, I think that's exactly right. They just assume that once you read the Bible, as the early Christians did, if you read the Bible, you will become a Christian.
Right.
It's automatic because you will see the truth because God wrote the thing. So, yeah, God wrote white fragility. So when you read White Fragility, that's the name, right? Robin DiAngelo.
Yeah,
When you read
Robin
that,
DiAngelo. Yeah.
you'll see that it's the truth and you'll convert.
Yeah.
It's the same thinking. You're completely right.
Right. And
Yeah.
it's what I hate most about this discourse, and this goes back to like cathedral concept or whatever, is that like how much of our I just like I'm tired of having to talk about grifters and their books. You know, it's like these people, it's like, you know, they're going on Jimmy Fallon, they're talking to people, and Jimmy Fallon doesn't even know what's going on, right? He's a guy who does a game show basically for kids. I mean, that's what he does. That's all he is for today. And they because of the blackface thing, they brought on Robin DiAngelo, right? Because again, it's like they got to exercise the sins he committed against the progressive faith, right? So they got to get some priest to sprinkle the holy water on him, telling him about his condition. And it's just it's gross. It's gross.
It's all performative, you know. It's moral performance, virtue signaling, right? I mean, it's a very, you know, do other countries do that? I don't think so. Is there virtue signaling like this in other countries? I don't think so. Is there the equivalent of white guilt in other countries where like the dominant class or group feels collective guilt about its status?
Probably like Germany with Nazis. They obviously like there was I don't know how. I mean, they have like a patriotic guilt. I mean, that was one thing when Merkel and the World Cup happened, is that she's like, it's okay to be patriotic and being like, that was a thing. And then I think maybe British people with some colonialism, but I don't know. Especially to the performative aspect, like the performative aspect. I don't think anybody's close to Americans on that.
Yeah. I mean, it's bad to be like related to a Nazi, I guess, but you can still disown that. But you can't disown your whiteness here. You know, you can't.
Oh, right.
There's this idea that we're all collectively guilty, right? All white people are collectively guilty. It's racialized.
Right.
I've never heard of that in another country. We are unique in that, I'm pretty sure.
Oh, I think I have heard about that one. It's in North Korea when they imprison your whole family for a sin you committed. I mean, that's only right. It was like this, like, you know, it's like that's the only country that has this kind of thinking.
That's right. I'm proud of that.
So this question is more of a meta question about the podcast, and it's sort of a series of questions, but it's from Nathaniel Owen. He asked, which unregistered interview did you enjoy most?
Oh, man.
And you're like conducting it. Yeah.
Yeah, no. So first of all, they're all my babies, so I have no favorites. They're all my children, so they have no favorites. It's kind of true. No, I mean, obviously there's many I like more than others, I guess, but I don't think there was one that I disliked. There were I had like out of 130 interviews, which is about 120 guests, maybe one or two people I didn't really like, and everybody else I'm kind of friends with. So I am friends with. I guess the one I keep coming back to over and over again is the interview with Janet Capron, who was she was a sex worker in the 1970s and wrote a memoir about it called Blue Money. And
that was good.
I interviewed her. That was about 2 years ago, I think, in New York, in her apartment in New York. And I don't know. I loved the book. I loved how honest she was. I loved how independent she was as a thinker. And I loved
Mm,
how open she was to my ideas. And we explored a lot, and we had a really good sort of chemistry, I thought. And she's older than I am, different
mm,
generation, and woman is just, which I don't think, I don't know, but very, very open and fun to talk to.
yeah,
And I think she got a lot out of it herself, and that really came through in the interview, and was really
yeah,
appreciative of it. And so I have and I love Janet a lot. She was on RU Live a few weeks ago,
mm,
and I
yeah,
don't know, her honesty about things, about being a sex worker, about taking drugs, and about how, there was actual pleasure involved, not just, not just
mm,
degradation and depression. And it was a mix. She talks about it like real life. And that's the way
right.
she is in her own life. So I really love that one. Janet Capron. I don't know the number of it, but God,
That's a great episode.
there's so many. There's so many. I mean, the one I
I
just did,
really enjoy the.
I was just going
Oh,
to
go
say, I
ahead.
mean, the one I just did with Michael Bell Sr., very
Mm,
different kind of episode. I mean, about, his son was killed by the Kenosha police in 2004, and he's waged a 16-year campaign to get justice and to get reform, and he's been very successful and gotten states to institute independent review boards for police killings, which they didn't do
right.
before, which is kind of amazing. A real goddamn hero, like a real goddamn
Yeah.
hero, and an
Yeah.
incredible story. I don't think I would do what he's done, because I don't have the fortitude for that, and I wouldn't want to live with my son's death for that long, the
Mhm.
way he has.
Yeah.
But he certainly is the way out. He certainly is. He
Mm,
laid the path for real criminal justice reform in this country, and all we have to do is pay attention to him and
yeah.
follow what he did. Don't even have to follow him as a
Yeah.
leader, just follow the example. He just put a lot
Yeah.
of pressure on police departments all over the country, and they succumbed, and they gave in, and they've actually started instituting reform in large part because of his campaign. And so I think, like, in terms of journalism, that's the kind of journalism I always wanted to do. When I was
Mm,
an 18-year-old, freshman, and writing for the college
yeah.
newspaper, trying to expose the college presidents for his misdeeds or whatever. I mean, this week's episode, that was really what I wanted to do, was actually, like,
Yeah.
intervene in an issue that I care a lot about, and actually make a
Yeah.
difference, and actually help someone get their voice out. I mean, and I'm really proud of that episode. So those are
Yeah.
two. Those are two. Yeah.
I really enjoy. I listened to it a while back again. Is the Glenn Lowry episode when, from what at least, like, I don't know if you talk about it strictly in the episode, but it seems like you went to his office and it was like a cold call almost interview.
Yeah.
Was it like,
No.
because he's like look at because he was like I'm very I'm very like, it was interesting. He just kept on talking about, I really got to go. But then, like, the conversation you guys had about, like, the 1950s, the
Hmm.
queer pastors, all that, like, stuff, that history, and his own, how he talked about his own drug addiction and all that stuff. It was just such a great episode, where it was like the personal, the academic, the interchange was just so great in that episode.
Oh, good.
Um,
I'm glad you liked
yeah, I
it.
love
The
Yeah, this is great.
that I think that's the second most downloaded episode.
Oh,
After
really? Okay.
Gavin McInnes is number one, and
Okay.
then Glenn
Yeah.
Lowry's number two, I think. But no, the story with that is, I invited Glenn onto the show by email. He said yes, and we confirmed with him, and he forgot all about it. He forgot totally that we were
Oh,
going to
okay.
interview him. So Paul, my partner, and I walk in. We knock on his door at Brown University, and he looks at us
Oh,
like, we have all the recording equipment, and he looks at us like, he says, "Oh, what were we going to do?" And I said, "Oh, well, I was going to interview you for my podcast." And he's like, "Okay, well, how long?" He's like, looking at his watch. He's like, "Because I got about 45 minutes." And I was like,
yeah.
I had just driven to Providence, Rhode Island, I mean, my God.
Right.
And I said, "Well, okay, Glenn, I'm a huge fan, da da da, And as
Yeah.
you know, I think it went for more than 2 hours.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And he's like,
So,
there's one point when he has to, like, go to his car, I think. And
yeah,
yeah, he's like, yeah, yeah.
that's right.
It's pretty good.
That's right. Yeah. So, yeah, he's a big talker. I'm a big talker. And I did tell him some things about Black history that he wasn't aware of, which was pretty funny.
Yeah.
But
That was,
yeah, he revealed a lot. The thing about Glenn, that, I mean, there's many things that set him apart. One of the things I
mm,
think that's underappreciated about him is his willingness to talk about personal stuff, very personal, very painful stuff. He's talking about stuff that I'm not sure I would, in public. And you won't find that among political people. You won't find that among academics for sure. But you will find it among addicts. And Glenn is a recovering addict. So when you've been in the rooms, when you've been in AA or NA, and that's what it's all about. It's about releasing the shame by talking out the worst things that have happened, the worst things that you've done, the things that you feel the worst about. It's about talking them out entirely in front of other people who have done similar things, who won't judge you. And so you get all this shame released that releases all these other feelings that you're able to put out there now. I've been through that, and it's one I know that there's a lot of stuff I'm able to talk about with no difficulty at all, simply because of those meetings, because I was in there. So I think that's, that really sets him apart. I mean, he's so like special in other ways too. But that's like, when he was talking about his mom running a speakeasy in his house, growing up, and that whole thing, and then his own drug addiction, and he got into lots of trouble with women.
It's like his career.
He was into drugs and women, and and he got into a ton of trouble. And but he's willing to talk about it as frankly as anybody possibly could. And he's a damn professor of economics at Brown University, world famous. It's no one does that. That's really, really admirable. So, I love that interview. I love Glenn. He's basically a hero of mine. He's definitely more conservative than I am. We don't agree on everything. He's got some pretty serious conservative streaks in him, but love him very much for those qualities in particular.
He's like a unregistered triple threat almost. He has like everything. Exactly. Nathaniel kind of continues with this question saying, and finally, in your life leading up to the current place as a podcast host and also a rebel against the American university system, are there any notable mistakes you made along the way that you feel is important to warn others not to make as well?
Well, so I entered graduate school in 1991. And at that point, it was bad. It was hard to get a good job in academia, but it was definitely possible, especially if you went to a school like Columbia and got a PhD from like a top tier grad school, which it was. So at that point in 91, there were people who came out of Columbia who got my friend Adam Rothman, who's actually going to be on the show next week. He's been at Georgetown ever since, and I had other friends get jobs at Harvard, and it was doable. By the late 90s, it was really it was really contracting, the job market. And so I don't know. I mean, by then it was too late though. I was already I was done basically. I had written a book, I'd written a PhD, and then it got even worse, with the identity politics, and basically they wouldn't hire white men at all. So I don't know. Was that a mistake? I mean, but then technology came along, the internet came along, and allowed me to have this whole other career doing all the stuff I loved in academia and none of the stuff I hated in academia. Right. The administrative stuff, the bureaucratic stuff, running the place, grading papers. Those are the things I hated. And my colleagues. Those are the things I disliked the most about academia. The academics, the people.
Right.
So I have none of those, but I get to talk about history and philosophy and politics and all these things, and feelings, also stuff that we don't talk about in academia, right? I talk about my personal life, your personal life. Everybody's motivated. Everybody at Renegade University is totally motivated to be there to talk about ideas, to talk, whereas students at the colleges I taught at, some of them were, and many of them were asleep, right? No matter how well you taught. It's just like, thank God. So I got really lucky. So was it a mistake to go get a PhD in 1991 when the whole market was collapsing? I mean, yes and no. I don't know. It was the only thing I could do. Mistakes to avoid,
Do you wish you started earlier? Do you wish you left the university system earlier and started doing this thing?
I couldn't because there was nowhere to go. There were no podcasts, right? There was no outlet for me. There was no way to do it. Yeah, I don't know what
Mm.
I just got really lucky with technology. I wish podcasts had started 10 years earlier, then I would have done it
Yeah.
probably. Um,
Yeah.
but also like, pretty clearly this is what I need to do. I mean, it's pretty clear that like
Mm.
I have to have an outlet for these kinds of ideas, and this is what you know,
Yeah.
I'm good at it, and I think I should do it. So
Right.
I have just spent my whole adult life fighting to be able to do it. And
Right.
thank God for Silicon Valley and all its wonders.
That kind of actually, yeah, that's a good segue because this is coming from Eric, and you kind of answered this in the Facebook group, but he wants you to expound upon it. So,
Okay.
you mentioned your critique on capitalism about how it's like the root of mass anxiety and other common mental health issues.
Hmm.
What actions would you like to see taken, especially in the big picture society wide level, to alleviate those issues? And he goes on in the next comment talking about how he's skeptical of what you're talking about as your solution, and he agrees with your critique of capitalism, but he sees it almost as being like inherent to the system. And like, so where do you see the line, I guess, between the market as having these redeeming, giving us luxuries, giving us, crypto, other possibilities, right, is what the market's providing, while
Mhm.
also within the system is always going to be that sort of anxiety inducing kind of thing,
Mhm.
and like, you know, whatnot. So,
Yeah, yeah. Right. So my critique of that capitalism that he's referring to is that it's that it causes a lot of anxiety because there is no
mm,
safety net. I mean, in a pure market economy.
right.
Although I guess David Beto, who's a historian at the University of Alabama, will point out in his great book that before World War II, before the New Deal, there were mutual aid societies all over the country that did take care of people, that were an incredible safety net. And this was for poor immigrants, for
Right.
poor Black people, for all sorts of people. They provided medical insurance, they provided housing, sometimes they provided like universal basic income, the equivalent of it, things like that, job
Mm,
programs, you name it, or just cash bailouts, loans.
yeah.
Yeah, so and that was all private, that was all market. um
Mm,
but you know there's a lot of anxiety to be like, to have to survive, to have and to flourish, if you want to like not just survive but like be a hero, okay,
right.
in capitalism, right? Look at the lives of entrepreneurs, the famous entrepreneurs, the successful ones, the
Mm,
ones we admire,
yeah.
the ones who really changed the world. They worked like goddamn mules. They
Yeah.
worked constantly. And have their lives been enviable? I'm not so
Mm,
sure. I'm not so sure at
yeah.
all. I think their lives were full of anxiety and stress.
Mm,
And so, what do you do with that? Like, how do you solve that? I mean, obviously, I don't want the government, putting us into mental hospitals anymore like it used to. Um, I mean,
right.
Eastern philosophy and some religions actually are very useful for this. I've talked a lot about mindfulness. I think elements of Zen
Mm,
Buddhism are just really powerful and really helpful. They are not the only answer, I don't
right.
think, but you know, capitalism teaches us to think about the future all the time,
Mm,
right? We're always thinking about the future. The future is nothing but a cudgel of fear and anxiety, or can be, right? I mean,
mm,
to be worried and thinking about the future all the time is going to be anxiety making. So, and the Eastern way of thinking, generally speaking, if there is such a thing, is much more focused on the present.
mm,
Certainly in mindfulness, right? That's the whole point of it, is to stay focused on the present. The future
right.
does not exist. Don't think about it. Stay here. Stay now. Um,
Mm,
that's been a really important thing for me. It's not gotten rid of all the anxiety, but it's certainly taken the edges off of it for me.
mm,
Um, and so I guess some common, I'm going to sound like some Silicon Valley guy, but like some combination of like a market economy and like a whole lot of meditation, it's like,
yeah. Yeah.
and kind of, well, I mean, my whole career really has been a big attack on Western repression, right?
Mm,
That's been, so I think the repression that's rife within our society, within Western society, of
right.
sexuality in particular, right?
Yeah.
of our bodies, of our minds in all sorts of ways, right? So much repression that goes on. That's the other thing. I think we got to keep attacking that repression and let people be free. And I think the more free we are to speak and feel and act and behave in ways that we want to, regardless of social norms, I hope at least we'll be a little happier.
Right.
So that's been my mission since day one, really. And, you know, this country was founded on repression, and it still enacts the repression. It's just in different ways now, but some ways that are still similar. So I'd say that the mind-body split, the mind-body duality that's so central in Western thinking, so central in our thinking. The mind is good. That's where rationality is. That's where logic is. That's where discipline is. That's where order is. And the body's where all the bad stuff is, sex and sexuality and leisure and the desire to drink and all these things. That fiction that's so central in Western society, get rid of that, you know, embrace the body. Don't be ashamed of it. I think sexual shame is terrible and a real big reason for a lot of our self-hatred and a lot of our feelings of pain, suffering. So there's a lot in our own culture that we need to just get rid of, just let go of, let go of. And you don't even have to attack it. It's not about attacking. It's about letting go. It's about letting go of these constructs, you know, that sex outside of marriage is bad, or, you name it. There's all sorts of forms of repression that we can just let go of, and I think we'll be happier. That's all I got.
I think that, you're totally right about, like, there is this weird, and I think it's a very American thing, this kind of like entrepreneurial mythos, right? That's definitely combined with the American dream. And take a poll of the room and how many people can run their own business, right? It's just like, it's this false notion. And a lot of people on the right like to talk about how, this egalitarian idea that everybody's equal and everybody, it's just like, not everybody can pull themselves up from their bootstraps, let's be honest, right? And I think that's the problem with a lot of right libertarians or right kind of capitalist people, is that they don't think about that. The Eastern religions, I think that's really interesting about how meditation, and you think of like Headspace or any of these apps, like I think that has done more to add that kind of mindfulness element to American society than anything else, right?
I love Headspace. That's how I learned how to meditate, was Headspace. I still use it. I strongly recommend it. It's not cheap, unfortunately, but I do recommend it. But there's all sorts of apps, and it's seeping in, thank God, to Western culture, these ideas about being present. You know, a lot of it gets dismissed as like woohoo, like, you know, new age nonsense. But no, I'm sorry. Like, the simple idea of being present is radical.
Right.
Is radical.
100%. Yeah. I think also the best place in capitalism to be is the son or daughter of a rich person, right? Because you get all of the get the big safety net from your family, and you get to truly enjoy the real decadence that capitalism can provide, I think.
Well, actually,
okay,
you know
let's
what?
See.
Wait, no, I have.
You disagree? You disagree?
I do. Well, so my mother's a psychotherapist.
Okay.
And she told me.
Okay.
She told me that a large number of her patients are the children of wealth, and that being the child of wealth is actually a terrible curse for them. It's actually the cause of much of their suffering. You know, this country, remember, its Puritanism is not a celebration of wealth. It's a celebration of work.
Right.
So our deepest cultural impulses celebrate those who work hard, regardless of what they get for it. Not the wealthiest people. We actually tend to dislike the wealthiest people. We tend to have negative things to say about them, either from envy or resentment or something. But the people who really work hard, and especially those who pull themselves up by their bootstraps, right? That's who we really love in this country. So if you're the child of a wealthy person, you can't really be either one of those things ever. You can never be a true American hero.
You never can be a true American hero.
You can never be a true if you're born rich, because you can't pull yourself up. You can't be Horatio Alger. You can't pull yourself up by your bootstraps.
Yeah.
And you can't really ever work hard enough to prove that you're really a hard worker, because none of it's, you know, you're doing it. It's sort of obvious you're doing it just for show. Right.
Right.
So you can't ever be that Rocky Balboa kind of American hero, underdog, Horatio Alger kind of. That's the person we love the most. And if you're born rich, you can never be that person.
I think This reminds me, which is interesting, going back to sort of like the left and how often their critique of Trump, is daddy gave you that money, daddy put the managers to make them, it's like you didn't work
Yeah,
for it, right? Which is
right.
this, it is and then also the tax return stuff as well. But
Hmm.
I mean, Trump seems like he's enjoying being the son of a. I'm curious what his personal views of his wealth are and whatnot. But yeah.
Well, I mean, Trump was ambitious. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. He was ambitious in an unusual way among the children of wealth, and he managed to put it together into his own empire.
Right, right.
So he sort of stands apart. I mean, would he trade in being born to a wealthy man? No, probably not. But I'm just saying that I think for a lot of people, and well, here's the thing: Trump, we know, like violates so many cultural norms, right? And maybe
Right,
that's
right.
one
That's
of
what I'm
them. Like he
saying.
doesn't give a shit about the Horatio Alger story, right? Maybe I wouldn't be surprised. He doesn't give a shit about a lot of stuff that we all hold sacred in our culture. So maybe, but no,
Right.
I mean, it's just I think it afflicts a lot of people who are born wealthy that they can never be
Mm.
they can never be American heroes.
Right. I think Tim Dillon had a joke recently talking about Trump with the whole Atlantic piece and how, all these things he's been saying about the military. And Tim Dillon's whole bit was basically is like, how do you expect the guy who lived in a penthouse his whole life to understand someone who's possibly going to die for a Camaro, or like in
Right.
a like in a war abroad, right? It's like it's just so not to his thinking. Is like if your job is not going to get you supermodels, make you very rich, have
Mm,
like this inflated ego, then
mm,
why do we even expect a guy like that, living in the Upper East Side or wherever, to understand the rationality or the rationale for someone who would go abroad or fight in the army or whatever.
right.
Not that again, there's the whole debate about it being no source or whatever, but I think it's like that's a very true take probably about how his perspective is shaped, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, Americans don't care about politics, which is mostly good, except when they vote, except when they exercise their power. You know.
Right.
One more.
Yeah. Let me get a good one. So James Ginniban, again, he's sort of referencing your old Reason.com article called the Empire of the Sun, which talks about like
Oh,
Obama, I believe, right?
yeah.
And he's sort of curious about like, we know about the Bushes and Obama's lifelong connection to empire makers, including like intelligence operatives, banking, energy, et cetera, et cetera. What do you know about like Clinton's, Reagan, Trump, and Al Gore as far as like, or any other like, is there any other mainstream politician that really has like that lineage connecting them?
Hmm. Great question. Yeah. Good question.
That's like a fascinating story.
Yeah, well, like so, James is referring to an article I wrote for Reason many years ago about Obama and his biography, and that was when two biographies of his mother had just come out, or one of his
Okay.
mother and one of his childhood. One was by Dinesh D'Souza, which was a psychotic screed, it made no sense, and the other was like a sort of liberal pandering book, painting his mother as this wonderful do-gooder hero. Well, it turns out that Obama's mother and father, Barack Sr., both essentially were working for the CIA, and they met at the East-West Center in Hawaii, which was a creation of the CIA to
Mhm.
fight the Cold War in Asia, by winning hearts and minds, converting
Wow.
by converting Asian businessmen and intellectuals to American ways of thinking. And she worked for the
Mm.
Ford Foundation. This is her name was Stanley Ann
Wow.
Dunham. This is Barack's mother. She worked for the Ford
Mm.
Foundation her entire career as an anthropologist, teaching Indonesian businessmen American practices.
Wow.
This was cultural. I mean, this was state-sanctioned, CIA-funded, CIA-directed cultural
Mm.
imperialism. There's no doubt about it. Barack Sr., his father from Kenya, he was sent to the East-West Center at the University of Hawaii by Tom Mboya, who was one of the main political leaders in Kenya at the time. At the time, he was a dissident, but he had aligned himself against the British with the Americans at a certain point. And so the CIA made
Mm.
him their guy in Kenya. So Tom
Mm.
Mboya
Wow.
and his faction, his political faction, was aligned with the CIA in the early 1960s, and they sent him to so they got funded, and they had to pick one of their guys, an economist, to send to the University of Hawaii with CIA funding, and that was Barack Obama, who became Barack Obama Sr. So, and then
Wow.
and then Barack Obama, who became the president, he grew up with his mother, and he grew up with his mother doing CIA work his whole life. Um, And
Right.
so to say that he's like this like Muslim radical, anti-colonial, anti-American radical is just like nuts. Makes that, which was Dinesh D'Souza's argument, right? It's the exact
Right.
opposite. I'm like, no, this guy, like, he was literally, the name of the article is son of an empire. I mean, he is the son
Right.
of the empire. He was created by the CIA. The CIA made him possible, I should say. He wasn't created by them, but the CIA made Barack Obama possible. Absolutely. He brought those people together, and he was raised in
Yeah.
that environment around people who believed that it was good to spread American values. Right.
Wow. Right.
That was
Yeah.
his
Yeah.
mother. That was his mother. His mother believed in her heart, and that's her life's work was to spread American values across the
Wow.
world. Yeah. Yeah. So, look what Barack did, right? He continued the Iraq War. He had a surge in
Right.
Afghanistan. He escalated those wars. And he didn't back down from the empire one bit. He never said anything like what Trump said last Monday. Not one bit. He said, in fact, before he was elected, he said, America needs to renew its global leadership. A very famous article in Foreign Affairs. And if people were like, what are you talking about, Barack? You're one of us. You're a good guy. You're on God's side. You're not on the devil's side. I said, no. See, this is the problem with this Manichaean thinking, people. The Democrats are not on your side. They're on the state side. They're on the side. They created the damn empire. It was Roosevelt and Truman in particular, and then Kennedy and Johnson who really expanded the empire. That was their mission. And they did it. They created it and expanded it. So, I guess the answer, but the question was about others. So the Clintons, no. I mean,
is there any like way back?
So Clinton. Sorry. I mean, the Clintons, no. Obviously, we know Bill's background is just redneck. Hillary's background is like, I think, sort of like middle class managerial. Her family, not political. I don't think they were politically powerful at all. The others, Jimmy Carter had no connections in the family. The Bushes, of course, do. In many ways. There are a lot of Bushes, not just the ones who are president.
Right.
Vannevar Bush was a very important one. He's actually in my book. And the Kennedys, famously, they get elected to office and die. That's what the Kennedys do. It's incredible. No, there have been several presidents. I mean, for a long time, they all came out of the Ivy Leagues. They all came out of the same sort of economic class, the Northeast elite. But not all. I mean, Andrew Jackson was the first famous sort of non-Northeast elite president, right? Or Southern elite. But yeah, it's it doesn't matter so much where they come from. What matters is where they went to ideologically. So everybody who became president had to, at some point, align their thinking with a very particular worldview of the United States as a global empire. Right? That the United States is and should be and must be a global empire. And that capitalism in its state-managed form is the best form of economics, et cetera. And that, the limited form of democracy we have is and so like, that's where they all ended up, which is sort of, it's all kind of it's a liberal progressive ideology, actually, even though some of them were called conservatives or reactionaries, but the idea that America should dominate the globe, there's nothing conservative about that. That's a radical notion. That's a radical. Caesar was a radical revolutionary, and all the founding fathers wanted to be Caesar, to remake the world in their own image, which is what they've been doing for 230 plus years, right? So no, it's about this idea of American exceptionalism, American, it's God-given duty to lead the world. The idea that America is the best place and we are obligated as Americans to extend our beneficence to the world, to give what we have to other people. It's that idea which is so seductive to elites. To become president, until Donald Trump, you had to buy that narrative, hook, line, and sinker, and Obama did.
Yeah. Awesome.
How's that? How do we do?
That was great. That was awesome. Yeah.
You did great.
Love it.
I want to say
thank you.
You are definitely my favorite other host of Unregistered?
I there's not a lot of competition, but I will gladly take first place.
Landry, actually, there was a lot of competition. Man, this has been a lot of fun. This has been great. And it's been a pleasure to be on the other side, so to speak.
Yeah.
Let's do it again.
Do this again sometime. Yeah.
Cool, man. All right. I guess I'll talk to you soon. Thanks for doing this.
Yeah. Yeah, no problem. It was great.
Okay. Peace.
Awesome. Peace. Have a good weekend.
This is the Unregistered Podcast, and I'm Thaddeus Russell. To join the new Renegade University, go to renegadeuniversity.com. To join the new Unregistered Underground, the supporting listeners group for the podcast, go to unregisteredunderground.com. Thanks for listening.